In this video, I'm going to be going through one of my favorite Jordan Peterson interviews of all time, where he's being interviewed by a woke journalist. And this is right before he got sick, guys. So you can see the anguish in his body language and you can see that he looks a little bit tortured. But with that, he's also quite unfiltered and direct in this conversation. And even though he wouldn't consider that his best look or his best self, man, it makes for some interesting content. Let's get into the clips.
We've met some of your fans, and we got the impression they were all male fans, the ones that we talked to, and that they were struggling with their manhood, and that you give them this message that it's okay to be a man.
It's not okay. It's necessary. What the hell are we going to do without men? You look around the city here, you see all these buildings go up. These men, they're doing impossible things. They're under the streets, working on the sewers. They're up on the power lines in the storms and the rain. They're keeping this impossible infrastructure functioning. This thing that works in a miraculous manner. They work themselves to death, and often literally. And the gratitude for that is sorely lacking, especially among the people who should be most grateful. You see university professors, especially of the social justice bent, who are among the most protected and privileged people that the world has ever produced. They take everything they have for granted, failing to understand entirely that there's a massive infrastructure of unbelievably hardworking, solidly laboring, working class men breaking themselves in half on a regular basis, making sure that everything that always breaks works. And so a little gratitude for that is in order. And it's very useful to tell everyone, not just men, that they have an important role to play, a necessary role, and that if they act properly and honestly and forthrightly, that they can put their lives together and they can help their families and they can make their communities better, and that's not toxic masculinity, that appalling phrase. It's what keeps the world going round. And if we had any sense, we'd understand that.
He's damn right when he says it's necessary to be a man. And it's clips like this that are the beauty of Jordan Peterson. This really touches on the raw essence of why he is so unbelievably popular with young men. It has become so popular in our culture to shit on masculinity and try and make men more and more like girls. And before Dr. Peterson came about, there wasn't really a mainstream pushback to that came in the form of a wise father figure-like character that Jordan Peterson is. Don't go anywhere, guys, because the next point that Jordan Peterson makes is one of the most important points you could possibly make, and one that nobody ever talks about. But before we get there, if you do get value from this content, chuck a thumbs up on the video, leave me a comment, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and turn on all notifications so that you can come back and slap at the bass more often.
Slap at the bass, man. Slapping the bass, man. There you go. Slap at that bass, man.
And none of that's credited to the oppressive capitalist patriarchal system, which also is doing miracles, is performing miraculously all around the world, raising the standard of living of poor people everywhere in the world at a rate that's unprecedented in human history. The UN itself, which I would hardly regard as a pro-capitalist organization, believes that absolute poverty will be eradicated by the year 2030 in its totality. It's been halved since between 2000 and 2012. We're moving rapidly towards a post-poverty world economy where no one is starving except for political reasons. And there's no gratitude for that either.
You think capitalism is?
There's absolutely no doubt about it. It's the collapse of the Soviet Union and the catastrophic economic policies that the communists implemented, especially in places like South America and Africa. And the burden of that has been lifted at least slightly. And so we start to see some semi-sane economic policies that reward people for their own entrepreneurial productivity and provide them with a modicum of security. And we're producing surpluses in every possible direction. Free electronic communication for everyone in the world, rapid dissemination of fresh water and sanitation facilities, markedly reduced child mortality, which is now in sub-Saharan Africa down to the same levels it was in Europe in 1952. It's an absolute miracle, and no one's aware of it. And it's to be laid at the feet of the dissemination of the idea of individual sovereignty and free market principles around the world. And if you dare to put yourself forward as a spokesperson for the poor, you could do nothing better but to hope that we make everybody on the damn planet as rich as we possibly can, as quickly as possible.
Such an unbelievably important point that he's just touched on there. And remember, this interview was pre-COVID, and Jordan Peterson has only escalated his rhetoric around this narrative. In the 21st century, we have been making unbelievable strides towards a post-poverty world. The gift of capitalism and free markets has been spreading and enriching the third world at unbelievable rates, far quicker than anybody could have predicted. Countries that have adopted free market principles like India and
China
have been growing exponentially. If you want to look at the difference between capitalism and communism, all you have to do is look at North Korea versus South Korea, and so on and so forth. But what I'd really like to put the spotlight on is something that isn't talked about as much, which is the immense progress that has been happening in Africa. According to UN.org, evidence that opulence has found a new home in Africa can be seen across the continent. According to New World Wealth, a consultancy based in the UK and South Africa, there are about 165,000 very wealthy individuals in Africa with a combined net wealth holdings of more than 660 billion. This equates to roughly 28% of total individual wealth held on the continent. From 2000 to 2013, Africa's very wealthy individuals increased by more than 150% compared to the worldwide growth rate of 73%. Furthermore, surprisingly, Ethiopia, a country that for long has been the face of Africa's afflictions owing to the devastating famine of 1984, is creating more millionaires at a faster pace than any other African countries. Ranked among the top 10 fastest growing economies in the world, Ethiopia more than doubled its dollar millionaires from 1,300 in 2007 to 2,700 in 2014. As the number of dollar millionaires in Africa increases, global companies in the luxury and fashion industry are entering new consumer markets. In the recent past, sports car maker Porsche, French luxury good conglomerate LVMH and Louis Vuitton, Italian fashion and leather goods brand Gucci, and Danish jewelry brand Pandora, amongst others, have set up shop in African countries. You know that when Gucci and Louis are setting up shop, things are going better.
Yeah, let me take it to the movie, shawty.
Furthermore, Africa's pre-COVID-19 top 5 performing economies are projected to grow by more than 5.5% on average in 23-24, and to reclaim their position among the world's 10 fastest growing economies. These countries are Rwanda, 7.9%, Cote d'Ivoire, 7.1%, Benin, 6.4%, Ethiopia, 6%, and Tanzania, 5.6%. The next graph that we're going to look at from Econometrics is a graph showing the GDP of 50 different African countries from the year 1960 to 2016. And very interestingly, you'll remember that Jordan Peterson said that it was to do with the collapse of the Soviet Union, which happened at the end of 1991, which you'll see here is pretty much the exact inflection point for many of these GDPs to start rapidly increasing. Furthermore, millions of people die every single year from a lack of access to clean drinking water. The photo that I've got on screen here is the share of deaths attributed to unsafe water sources. And as you can see, the darker the shade on the country, the higher the share of deaths attributed to unsafe water sources. And as I click play, you can see how quickly this problem is being solved. It's absolutely amazing. And if we continue on this trajectory, then it's very conceivable that within a generation, we will have a world where nobody is dying because they actually can't access clean drinking water. The next chart that we're going to look at is the child mortality rate under 5 years old in Africa from 1955 to 2020 via Statista. And you'll see just how quickly it has declined until 2020 when it's about the mid-50s range. And then furthermore, this is the infant mortality rate in Europe from 1950 to 2021 from the same source. And you'll see right here that Europe was about at that mid-50s range in the early to mid-1950s, just after World War II. It's conceivable that within a generation or two, their infant mortality rate could be about where we are today. Furthermore, the next map shows the birth rates worldwide in 2017. And as you can see, the countries that are more brown, maroon, and orange, yellow, and green have the highest birth rates, whereas the more developed, richer countries have the lower birth rates. If you look here at the top 10 countries with the highest birth rates, they go as follows: Niger, Angola, Mali, Uganda, Benin, Chad, Congo, South Sudan, Somalia, and Mozambique. What do all those countries have in common? And then you look at the top 10 countries with the lowest birth rates: Monaco, South Korea, Andorra, Japan, Taiwan, Greece, Puerto Rico, Portugal, Spain, and Bulgaria. Now, why is this important? Well, because in order to maintain your population, you need to be at the replacement rate or above, which is 2.1 children to every woman. If we don't have that, which many countries these days are significantly below it, then it leads to having a much older population, which causes the problem of having less working age people that will have to carry a bigger load for the people at the top who can't work. And there are many, many other problems also associated with it. So that's why I really don't like when we get told in the West that it's immoral to have children, that it's bad for the environment to have children, and people actually get shamed for having big families. Whereas in Africa, they're turning the lights down low, putting some Barry White or some Chris Stapleton on, and getting the job done. Nigeria is predicted to have a bigger population than
China.
by the year 2100 because
China. I love them. China.
have such a drastically decreasing birth rate. Now, obviously, it's not all sunshine and rainbows in Africa. They have huge problems with political corruption over there and also from intervention from foreign countries. But obviously, this progress is good. And if we want to continue this progress, we have to make sure that these developing nations have access to affordable energy. This is one of the key ingredients to continuing to lift these people out of poverty. And it's why I'm so repulsed by the hypocrisy of the woke left, who talk about how terrible capitalism is and how they want to abolish fossil fuels and climate change, when in reality, when it comes to actually solving the issue of poverty in this world and immense suffering and starvation and famine and unnecessary death, what these countries are crying out for is more free market capitalism and access to more and more affordable energy.
Here's a question: diversity, inclusivity, equity, the triumvirate, right? The modern triumvirate. Equity is equality of outcome. Okay, let's talk about diversity. Are people different or not? Well, if they're diverse and diversity is worth pursuing, then people are different. Or they're not. It's one or the other. So if they're diverse, they're different. Well, if they're different, if you let them manifest their diversity, you're not going to get equality of outcome. It's so incoherent that it defies comprehension. It's like if people were the same, well, then you get equality of outcome. And if they were the same, then you wouldn't have to worry about diversity. But if they're different, importantly different, culturally or biologically, whatever the reasons you happen to come up with, and you leave them be, they're going to pursue their individual, idiosyncratic, diverse interests, and that's going to produce an entire plethora of unequal outcomes. And in fact, we mostly work for unequal outcomes. You know, I mean, you have a career, you picked a specific career. You don't expect to be absolutely equal with everyone else on every single parameter because you specialized in something, and you're hoping that you can develop some expertise that ratchets you up a competence hierarchy so that you're good for something and so that you have some opportunities. And that's all associated with unequal outcomes as well. And there's supposed to be something bad about that? It's like it's what we're striving for. It doesn't mean that people are happy when they walk down the street and see a homeless person lying there, you know, half frozen to death and alcoholic in their sleeping bag. No one wants that. But those problems are very difficult to solve. You think, well, it's an economic problem. It's like, not usually. It's usually a mental illness problem, or it's an addiction problem, or most commonly it's an alcoholism problem. And throwing money at that is not going to help. So, you know, we have these hyper simplified solutions for problems that are so complex that fools leap in where angels fear to tread.
Fools leap in where angels fear to tread. A beautiful quote from the early works of Alexander Pope in the 18th century. And just such a brilliant point about diversity that basically shatters the whole argument. If you want diversity, people are going to be different. If people are diverse, they're inherently different, so they're going to achieve different outcomes. It's the natural human instinct to strive for different outcomes. And that is how the world was built. The more you achieve, the harder you work, and the more productive you are, the more you will rise up in the socio-economic ladder, which is very, very important for men, by the way, because women tend to mate select across and above in the socio-economic hierarchy. Stick around, guys, because I'm about to go pretty deep into some of Jordan Peterson's most fundamental philosophies. But if you do enjoy this sort of information, then it's important that you get to my website right now, pinned in the top of the comments, www.rattlesnaketv.com, and sign up for my email list where you'll get my top 10 books, movies, YouTube channels, and podcasts, plus mountains and mountains of value every single week.
This narrative of oppression it's so resentful and so ungrateful and so unrealistic and so historically ignorant that it's a miracle to me that people can swallow it. Human history is simple. Things were terrible before 1895. Terrible. The average person in the West lived on less than $1 a day in today's money, which is half the current rate that the UN regards as abject poverty, right? You're going to be pregnant from the time you were 14 till the time you were 30, and the chances are that you were going to live through that was like 0. Your parents were going to be dead, at least one of them. You were going to lose at least half your children. You're going to spend the vast majority of your time in back-breaking work. Your life was hard in a way that modern people can barely imagine. And there's been an economic miracle of unparalleled significance in the last 150 years. And we have so much more than we had then that the world isn't even vaguely the same. And yet we read backwards and we say, well, men were privileged. Which bloody men were privileged? Exactly. I mean, let's get down to the nuts and bolts of it. Who were privileged? The serfs who tilled the land? The knights who defended the feudal communities? The kings, perhaps, although I'm not so sure you would have wanted to live in a drafty and freezing castle with no plumbing or electricity or heating or entertainment through ice-cold winters with the constant threat of war. The men went off to war constantly. There were endless numbers of devastating plagues. No one had enough to eat. It's like, and now what are we doing? We're quibbling about whether men or women had a rougher time. It's like, Jesus, I've got no patience for Marxists. There's no excuse for it. There's no more excuse for it than there is for being a Nazi, in my estimation. And now maybe you should say, well, I should have patience for Nazis. But I don't.
That's not what I'm saying.
No, but it's not so clear that it's not what you're saying.
No,
because it is the Marxists that I'm objecting to. And somehow it's okay to be a Marxist. Because maybe you're for the poor, even though you're not. I don't think it's okay to be a Marxist. I don't even think it's a little bit okay to be a Marxist. I think maybe in 1918, when you didn't know any better, even though wise people had already warned against the danger for at least 50 years, then maybe you could have assumed that you would bring in the utopia with your ideas of equity. But it's 100 years later, and we've seen the carnage.
But you really see these people as the same thing as the Marxists, the Stalinist
they
Marxists.
Call themselves Marxists. No, they're worse than the Stalinist Marxists. Because the Stalinist Marxists didn't know who Stalin was going to be. And we know who Stalin was, and we know who Mao was, and we know who Pol Pot was.
So let's make this clear. You really think that these people who are battling for social justice, against discrimination, that they want some sort of Stalinist regime?
Well, they wouldn't say that. No, of course they wouldn't say that. Their policies would lead inevitably to it. And God only knows what they want in their heart of hearts.
Another great point about being a Marxist. It should be, when you think about it, totally unacceptable. But we have people who go on live TV and everybody has a great old laugh about her saying, I'm literally a communist.
He's not my hero. I'm a communist, you idiot.
You didn't plan any protests against him, did you?
Because I'm literally a communist.
And it just goes to show that the ideology of leftists is way too easily tolerated in today's day and age, especially considering we have over 100 million bodies in the 20th century to prove that they're wrong. The evidence is in. The experiments have been run. If somebody was to call themselves a Nazi or a fascist, we would be rightfully indignant about it because it's a disgusting thing to call yourself, because we have the historical evidence of what has come of those ideologies. Yet when some blue-haired university professor starts calling themselves a Marxist, they're all subversive and cool.
We're a little more progressive and ahead of the curve here in San Francisco.
There seems to be this other side, or it comes out in interviews sometimes, but it's also in 12 Rules, where you equate the feminine with chaos.
I don't do that.
No,
That's
I know,
ridiculous.
I know.
The Taoists have done that for 3,000 years.
I know, but
Right, it's not me.
No.
Right.
But you're selecting, right? You write a book which is an antidote to chaos, and you're selecting the stories in which the feminine is chaos, and also
I'm observing and collecting the stories.
But it's adding up, right? So you also talk about the importance of the Bible, in which women are deemed subservient.
No, they're not. That's complete rubbish. How in the world could you possibly derive that idea from biblical readings? The most fundamental statement in the Bible, and this is a miraculous statement, it's absolutely incomprehensible that it was written some thousands of years ago. Men and women are made in the image of God. Not men. Men and women.
But you know that there's also passages in there which do posit the woman as subservient.
What passages are you referring to?
Well, where it's told to Adam and Eve that women will henceforth have to obey their husband.
Well,
That's
that
just a
wasn't
paraphrase.
that wasn't what would you say? That wasn't a divine injunction. It was a terrible warning.
Okay,
It wasn't a statement about how society should be structured. It was a statement about the inevitability of that happening because women were going to be vulnerable in pregnancy and in child raising.
The idea of order and chaos, especially in Peterson's work, is an idea that's very important and it's very easily misunderstood and something that requires peeling back a few layers and understanding it a little bit further before you get offended about it. Order and chaos, having masculine and feminine representation, is an idea that's woven into the fabric of our being. It's an idea that's found cross-culturally amongst ancient theology and something that we identify with on an unconscious level. Like in the ancient Greek work Theogony by Hesiod, for example. Gaia, who's one of the Greek primordial deities, arises from chaos. Chaos in the sense of nothingness, randomness, an abyss, just void. And obviously Gaia is the representation of Earth, and then she gives birth to Uranos. And Uranos is the personification of heaven, which has masculine representation. These ancients believed that reality itself was gendered, and this is like an immutable cosmic principle. Gender isn't non-binary. Gender isn't socially constructed by the West or the patriarchy. Masculine and feminine representations are at the very foundations of our being. Furthermore, Peterson talks about Taoism, and when he's talking about Taoism, what he's talking about is the symbology of the yin and yang. And this is just another representation of masculine, feminine, order and chaos found within the ancient world. But it's important with this symbology to understand that without chaos, we don't know what order is. So order itself depends on the contrast between the two. And we must never lose sight of the perfect unity between order and chaos, and that the two need each other. And furthermore, it's important for us to all be in tune with order and with chaos. Order is responsibility and doing the tasks that you need to do over and over again to achieve results that you set out to achieve. Chaos, however, is also necessary. It's the call to adventure. It keeps you on the edge. And the idea of balancing order and chaos is like the ultimate meaning and the ultimate satisfaction in life. And I don't want to talk too much about this and get too philosophical. If you guys want a bit more philosophy on Rattlesnake TV, then let me know in the comments, because I do enjoy this sort of thing. And when I talk about ideas of masculinity and femininity on this channel, I don't do it because of some arbitrary bias. I do it because I'm actually deeply moved by these ideas. And I believe that the idea of the masculine and feminine, order and chaos, yin and yang, this is deeply, deeply fundamental for human beings. And I actually got this tattoo under my arm. As far as I know, it's called the God Self icon. And what it basically is a deity of some sort holding up what's normally two animals, a masculine and a feminine. And the way I interpret it is balancing order and chaos. You could also interpret it as maybe some sort of a holy trinity. And if you guys have your own interpretation, then let me know. But we live in a culture nowadays that is so eager to do away with these ancient philosophies. And I truly believe that that is a grave error on our part. And it's a mistake that we may never recover from. Thank you so much for watching, guys. If you would like access to uncensored, exclusive content and to join the Rattlesnake TV community and support the channel so that I can bring the best content possible to you as often as possible, then please consider hitting the link in the bio, rattlesnaketv.locals.com, and support the channel. And if you want to watch another clip, click right here. And if you want to subscribe to the channel, if you get value from these videos, then click right here. Until next time, I'm Jake. This is Rattlesnake TV.